Hi, thank you so much for purchasing the new pattern that I've just released, the Alanna bag. This is going to be a really fun sew. I think you're really going to enjoy it. There's some, it all goes together fairly simply. I'm going to walk you through step by step, everything that we're going to go through. We're going to put, if you haven't ever done anything like this before, you're going to put on the overlay on here. There's another one inside the bag. There's a pocket in the front here. I'm going to show you how I do that. The recessed zipper, super simple, really nice, very classy touch as well. Everything about this bag is just going to go together so simply that you're just going to love making it. So enjoy yourself, sit back, relax, and spend some time with me. So this is me all prepped and ready to start sewing my new Alanna bag. First, you're going to notice that it looks like there's lots of pieces to print, but actually only 7 pages actually contain pieces that need to be printed. The rest are all rectangles. I have included all of the pieces for those that really like to have a piece for, even if it's just a rectangle, but actually like to have a pattern piece for each piece of the bag. It's all there for you. And also, none of my pieces, none of the pattern pieces themselves are ones like, they're not half. So they're not ones that are supposed to be placed on the fold in order to give you a full pattern piece. All of mine are actual full pattern pieces. So hopefully that will make it easy. Pretty simple, just have to cut on the lines, match the letters that correspond, tape them together, and away you go. So I think you're going to have a lot of fun with it. It's a great bag. It goes together really easily, and even the cutting and stuff is really quite straightforward and simple. So have fun. We're going to get started with assembling the front. So what we're going to start working on first of all is the pocket. So I'm going to use my pattern piece E and my pattern piece Q. So one is a lining, and you'll see how that comes together because it's going to be on the inside. So I've done that out of lining. Now piece E has a bit of a flare at the top, so we're going to use the part that is the widest. That's where we're going to pin, or if you choose to use clips. Even though this is fabric, I like the convenience of clips. So I'm just going to clip this together. And with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew all the way across the top here. So I've just done a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. I've got all this together. What is going to happen is this, we're going to fold this back over so that it's even with the bottom. Technically it's the bottom, I guess. And I'm going to press this down. So what I'm going to do though here is I'm going to press so that my seam, I'm going to leave my seam allowance. I'm not going to trim it down. I'm going to press it nice and flat though. I'm going to press it flat toward my exterior piece. What that's going to do is we're going to be putting some hardware on here. We're going to put our half moon clasp. So having that little bit of extra fabric and stability, I guess, in there is helpful. So on my lining side, this is what it looks like. This is flat. I've pressed that seam down. Now from the good side, I can see I've got a little bit extra here. So that's no problem because my pocket lining piece was a rectangle, it was straight, and my front pocket has a little bit of an angle, and you'll see why when we do the assembly, why I need that little bit of an angle. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to line up with my angled part, and I'm just going to trim off that little edge. We just want to trim down the extra. We don't want to trim down our pocket E piece. And so I have that. These are evened out, and I'm going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch across the top. Just a note, when you're top stitching, you want to lengthen out your stitching. Normally, or typically, we sew a regular seam at 2.5 when we are top stitching, and you can do some testing on that too and see what you like the best. I find for myself, I like using 3.5. So my top stitch length is going to be 3.5. When I'm teaching classes, one of the questions that's asked the most often, I would have to say, is when we get ready to top stitch, they want to know what width to top stitch at. Well, it's kind of a funny, not a funny question, but it's not an easy answer. I could say 1/8 inch, and they could figure out what 1/8 of an inch is and go from there. The biggest thing to me, and this is what I tell people, is whatever width you decide to start top stitching at, keep it consistent. Because if I do, on my front pocket here, if I do a top stitch here, and then later on a different part of the bag, I do a top stitch over here, or I do one really super close, and my top stitching wherever I'm going is all over the place, eventually it looks messy because things aren't consistent, and your eye automatically kind of gets drawn to the inconsistencies. So if you decide to top stitch here, then what I do is I always find a mark. I always find some sort of a reference point. I'm going to see if I can just zoom in here. All right, there we go. Okay. So I know on my foot, on this foot specifically, I choose a point that is about halfway the width of this side of the foot. This foot is consistent on both sides, so if I happen to be kind of having to top stitch using this other side, it happens sometimes doing straps, then I know that consistently if I top stitch and I use half of this side, I will continue to be consistent. So the word of the day, I guess, is consistent. Now, there are some things out there, and I will include my affiliate link to where these can be purchased on Amazon.com and Amazon.ca. Now, this is, I got a whole, well, now I have to, now that I talk about things, whoops, now I have to zoom out and show you. This was a whole little set that came, and I can't fit it all in here and move everything around. But anyway, there is, I want to say there was close to 30 feet. Here are some more of the feet, and I've just used chunks of foam, cut slots in them, and so I can always see my feet. Anyway, there's lots of really useful sizes and stuff in there. So zoom back in here again. Okay, so what I'm looking at, this is an edge guide foot, very, very similar to what I have on my industrial machine. So what this does is it's got a little ridge here, and you can, when you're sewing, you just keep your seam along that ridge, and it just gives you some help in keeping that consistent. So if you don't like to, boy, I'm saying consistent a lot. I'm consistently saying consistent. Anyway, if you don't like switching feet all the time, then this won't be for you. But I'm getting kind of lazy, and I like the fact that I don't have to concentrate quite so hard on keeping things straight. I mean, you still have to work at it, let me tell you. It's not foolproof, but it's a helpful hand in keeping your top stitch distance. So I'm just going to take my foot off here, and put this one on. You'll only see me sewing when I think that you need to. And this just happens to be one of those times where it's kind of neat to see how this foot works. So I am sewing on my Juki 2010, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to 3.5. Maybe I'll zoom out just a little bit here. So you can see I'm just lining it up with the edge of that foot. I don't need to back stitch here because this is just top stitching. It's not holding anything. And there we have it. So some nice top stitching. And when you lengthen out the stitch, then you get where it actually looks like top stitching, it doesn't blend in with the rest of your fabric. The next two pieces that we need are piece O and piece D. So this is going to be the lower part, kind of the inside pocket on the exterior though. So and then this is the top piece. Now this one, well, you'll see, I fussy cut it, so hopefully everything lines up. So on this one, we're going to take this piece, I'm going to fold this back over here, and I'm going to pin or clip this, and again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I have this one sewn together. I'm going to press this. I'm going to press everything toward the bottom, so toward the lining. Now if I feel like this isn't flat enough, I can just top stitch that a little bit too. Again, it's not even going to be seen. It's not even going to be a decorative stitch. But if you were using something where you thought, you know what, I would like just it to have a little bit more flatness to it, then top stitching would just hold that down. One of the things that happens in the course of doing things like making videos is you really only have one shot at it. So unless I wanted to start the whole thing all over again, which I really don't, I just kind of have to explain what you're going to be seeing. You're going to see me in the next step actually putting on the hardware here. What should have happened before this was done is I needed to put the fusible fleece. So where that should have been done is once this was put together without this on here, is I should have put on the fusible fleece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Then you'll be putting on the hardware. So once we get this piece, the upper part and the lining put together, we're going to then put on the fusible fleece. So here's the little test to see whether I did my fussy cutting correctly. So I'm going to line this up on the bottom with my corners, and look at that. So here everything lines up, and pretty happy with that. So now scooch this down. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick base stitch along the bottom here at about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't really matter. We're going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance down here as well. So I just want to make sure that when I stitch this down, just to hold it there, that I don't have that stitching isn't going to get into my seam allowance, and I'm going to have to pull it out later. So I just want it to stay that way. So I'm just going to do a quick base stitch across the bottom. So I'm not going to go through every different scenario that would be out there as far as hardware goes, because Goodness knows that there's tons out there, and there's lots of things that would be suitable. So when I used the little snap that I got from Emmeline Bags on the other fabric one, it worked with no problem. I didn't have to do any filler pieces or anything. I used this Half Moon piece of hardware on a different purse that I did, but I did it in leather, so it actually had more filler here. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to just add some extra Peltex. So that's where this little piece of Peltex comes from. So it's 1 3/4 inches wide by 3/4 of an inch deep. So I'm going to, on this piece, I'm going to fold this in half and find my center. Okay, so I've got a little bit of a crease there. I'm just going to use my chalk pencil. Something, it's not going to matter because you're going to remove it anyway. Now here, I'm just going to have to kind of go in between here. And that's going to fit a lot better. So I know that my Peltex is in there. I just want it big enough. All I did was I measured the width of this and how deep this was going to be, so that once this is on there, I don't have pieces of Peltex hanging off and stuff. So it's just in there and it's centered. I'm just going to give it a press because this specific Peltex that I was using is fusible, so I'll just get it to stay in there. I could have used glue if I wasn't using fusible Peltex as well, so no problem there. Okay, so I'm going to fit this on here, and I want to make sure that it's centered. So actually, this is just me. Again, I'm centering it so that I can see both this and where my center mark is here. Just going to give myself a couple of reference marks so I know that it has to be in between there when I flip this over and can no longer actually see my center. So that will give me a good idea there. So I'm just going to put a gob of glue inside there. I want it to run in toward, not out, just enough that it's going to just kind of hold my fabric in there without getting too messy. So I'm going to slide this on. Make sure it stays where it's supposed to. I could have also done my marks on the back of it. That would have worked too. So going back to my screws now, I'm going to make sure that, again, I'm going to use my Permatex, the medium strength, the blue stuff. And instead of putting it in the holes, put it directly on your screws. Oop. I'm not in love with these big bottles. I really do prefer the little tubes. And of course I'm going to use my little teeny turner. Make sure that it's flush. I can pick up and touch my these screws with the thread lock on it because I'm using the medium strength, the blue. This stuff dries rubbery. It does not dry like crazy glue. The red stuff is like crazy glue, and I felt really bad because someone wrote in and said that they had glued their fingers together using it. And I didn't realize that the red was like that. So, all right. So now I have this on. I'm going to put, I'll wait, but I'm going to put my protective coating back on there, so I don't want to throw this away. The biggest reason why I put this on here right away now is because I have access to be able to flip it back and forth and all of that. Also, I can put my, actually, you know what, even a better idea than this is, on this specifically, there's a screw right here, and I'll be able to feel that. So if I am gonna put this on because I don't even want my cutting mat to end up scratching my hardware. So I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to feel, yep, I can feel it right there. So that's going to be the center. I can use that as my guide. Now this is the washer. This is the other side of the magnetic snap, and it has the little prongs on it. So this is the washer for those prongs. So I'm going to just line that up. I'm just going to mark where I'm going to cut my slots for the prongs to fit through. And you'll hear me over and over and over talk about safety with your seam rippers. To me, there's almost nothing more unsafe in our sewing rooms than dull seam rippers. With a sharp seam ripper, we can do this with no problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm finding my spot here, and I'm going to plunge straight in. And if my seam ripper is sharp, then I barely have to use any pressure at all, and I can cut through there. If I have to really push on this, slip all the way through and I'm starting over again, or going for stitches. So from the other side, I'm going to feed those prongs through. There we go. And it actually, in this case, it doesn't even matter because it's round. I mean, I can see my prongs are a little bit off, but that's all right because they're still centered. I'm going to use a pair. I've got these ones. These ones are kind of cool. They're really flat and they don't have any teeth or ridges or anything on them, so they're kind of handy for crafting. So I'm just going to use these just to help me fold that down. Sure I am. There we go. There. Now, I guess I could have put some Peltex there. It wouldn't have been a bad idea at all. This is, being a magnetic snap, I don't think it's as big of a deal as if it was a clasp or something like a turn lock or something like that, where there could be a lot of, where nothing is going to give. So if something pulls on it this hard enough, it's just going to let go. So, but I could have put a chunk of Peltex underneath there, but what I am going to for sure do is just put a little piece of fusible fleece or Peltex or something along that line. So my scraps don't really ever get thrown away until they're so small that they can't be used anymore. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to glue that on top. What that does is it keeps the kind of the sharp edges and stuff like that from rubbing on the lining. And I could just put a gob of glue right on there. all good. And I'm just going to set that aside and just let that dry. So we have the hardware on. We have the fusible fleece over the whole back. Of course, we've kept it out of the seam allowances. It'll make better corners later on. Now what we're going to do is, the reason why these hang over a little bit is because this pocket, it won't show up until we actually have it assembled, the exterior assembled. But when a pocket has to go around a seam, if you don't give the pocket a little bit of extra room, then the interior part here actually kind of crinkles. There's not enough room for it. So we're going to just ever so slightly, right now it's gonna be hard to see on here, but there's a little bit of a bubble here. We move this over. I'm just going to clip this into place. And again, I'm just going to do a little an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch basting stitch down the rest of this just to hold that in place. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. It looks kind of funny now because it looks all, I'll show you here, it looks all bubbly. But when we actually get it assembled, that is going to give enough room that it just kind of curves around nicely. So again, both sides, all we're going to do is just give a base stitch. So 3.5 would be fine at about 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch. It's that part of it isn't important. So now I just have these ones done. That one's ready just to set aside. What I'm gonna, this is my piece A. So that's what I'm gonna be working with now. And what I'm gonna be, the only thing that I've done on here, now this is cork. I'm gonna do a zipper overlay. You could do the traditional method as well if you're not comfortable, or no, I shouldn't say comfortable. If you're not prepared to be able to do an overlay, if you don't have any cork or vinyl or a little bit of leather or something like that that you can actually put an overlay with, it can be done using the method of using a facing and turning it. That can be done as well, and then placing your zipper in there. For the purposes of this bag, however, I want to teach, if you don't know this method, I want to teach you how to do, or how I do, a zipper overlay. So this one is pattern piece number H, is this piece of cork. Now you can see with mine, now normally you could cut out the whole thing. I use my punch, my press plates, and my shape cutters. And so that makes really quick work of doing this. So I've already been really careful about punching a hole for this. Just in my template, I'm going to just clip this on here so that it stays in place. So I have my little square shape cutter, and that's just going to sit right in here. And I'm going to use my press plates, and I'm just going to punch the hole there. If you haven't seen how I use my press plates, I've got another YouTube video. Just give it a look. It's pretty cool. So cutting my holes out here for with my shape cutters and the press plates and my hand press really makes really quick work and gives beautiful smooth corners. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be really, really careful about lining up my ruler with just the very edge of the holes there. And again, being really careful that I don't go too far and end up cutting in up there. Cut one side. we go. So that cuts a really nice, neat hole. Well, sometimes, despite the best laid plans, things don't go as the way that you want them to. I've been in kind of a hurry. Well, not too much of a hurry, but I've been trying to get this pattern out. So it's I'm kind of correcting some mistakes. So your pattern pieces will be correct. Unfortunately, I'm trying to get the video out, so I don't have a chance again to go backwards. But it is what it is. Anyway, you get to hear me giggle a lot, I guess. So we're going to be 1.5 inches from the top here and 1 inch in from each side. And that will be our placement for our overlay. So that's what we're going to measure, and that's what we're going to put this at. So, I mean, I'm just kind of getting the idea of where I want this. There's 2 different ways of putting this down. One is double-sided tape. So on the back of this, I would put a couple of strips of double-sided tape, one on each side. I use a product called 303. It's by the same makers as 505. So if you do any spray basting with 505, you're familiar with it. 505 is a lighter glue. This, if you don't use tons of it, then you can get it off. It's not that big of a deal. But you can also use more of it, and then it is very permanent. So I've been using this a little bit more. I like it. It doesn't gum up my needle, I'm finding, either. I don't have a lot of problems even with double-sided tape, because I make sure that I keep it out of my seams and that kind of stuff as much as possible. But I'm quite liking this 303. What I'm going to do, because I want to position this down, I could use 505 too. That's not a problem either. I just know the hold of the 303 is a little bit stronger. So I'm going to just give a quick spray on the back of this, and then I'm going to position it down. So I'm just going to kind of set this here. So I'm lined up at 1.5 inches across the top, and I've got my ruler set at 1 inch over here. And I'm setting that into place. All right, so I know that I'm even across here. I can double check if I want before I sew it down permanently. And I actually, now this is me being picky. I can see that I'm not quite there. So I can reposition this just a little tiny bit. I'm going to move my ruler down. There. All right. So now this is ready to go. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to top stitch just around the whole exterior, and I'll take you with me to my sewing machine. Now I've put that little foot back on. So I was doing some other stitching and stuff, and I've put my little compensating foot, if you will, or my edge guide foot back on. Now I'm going to show you, this is exactly the same method that I do for when I'm using my industrial machines as well, for going around corners and that kind of thing. So I'm setting my stitch length again. I'm top stitching, so I'm setting it for 3.5, and I'm not going to start in a corner. I'm going to try and start at the most inconspicuous spot. Not that there is an awful lot of inconspicuous spots, but I just choose kind of after I come around a corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to come back up. I'm not going to back stitch here, but when I come around, I'm going to stitch over top of it again. So the straightaway is pretty easy. Now I'm coming up to my corner. I want nice corners. I'm going to do the best I can here because I'm actually kind of looking through my, looking through my camera as I'm trying to sew. So it's really quite awkward, but I'm going to do the best I can. So, and this is very literally, I'm going to be talking, and so I'm going to be maybe a little tiny bit slower, or I could stop talking and just sew, but that would be very unlike me. So, all right, so here we go. I've got a couple more stitches of straight stitches, and I very literally do this. And I'm trying to judge where my next stitch is going to go. So I'm lifting my foot. I have a knee lift on this that I use all the time. So now I'm at a straightaway again. Hopefully you were able to kind of see what I did there. So now I'm going to come in again to a corner. Because I just want to make small adjustments. And then I'm going in my straightaway again. Now I'm going to be coming up, my thread is right here. So I'm going to reach under the bottom here. It's a little bit difficult with these Jukies, but because they cut the thread so short. But I'm going to go there and I'm going to grab the loop from that top thread and I'm going to pull it to the back. And if I do it before I get right up close to it, it's a little easier. So I'm still making my little adjustments. And I'm just going to be coming over, and I cut my thread. So I'm actually even going to give you a close-up view of my stitching. So that really is, honestly, even with my industrial machine, that is how slow I go. I do very literally one stitch at a time all the way around. So I think I've done a pretty good job all the way around. So I'm okay with handcrafted. I just don't like homemade. So there we go. That's how easy getting that put on there is. So now that I have that, I'm going to flip this over. These overlays, once you get kind of around it and get used to maybe some corker or some, it's a great time to use some scrap pieces of leather or maybe a little bit of vinyl or something like that to do these, because boy oh boy, it dresses it up so nicely, and you're gonna find out it is so easy. It makes these zippers go in so nice. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to end up actually trimming out the back of this. So instead of having a facing where we would cut the slit and the little Y at the end and pull it through and then try and make sure those corners are all nice, all of that, this is what we're doing instead of that. So we've got all kinds of bulk back here. I'm not even worried about that, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my rotary cutter and just kind of cut a slice in here. And then I'm going to take my scissors. Now I'm going to need to be very careful And so I'm just going to kind of pull this away. That's why I didn't glue this down really hard, because I'm going to need to get underneath there. And I don't want to cut my overlay, so I'm going to be really careful. So I'm going to get my scissors in there, and I've got my fingers underneath this overlay in between. And I can cut this all the way around. Again, see, this is my overlay right here. I can get in there, you know, let's say even 1/4 of an inch is lots. I mean, you don't have to, we don't want to, the idea is not to trim everything out of there. We just want to get enough room in there, get some bulk taken out. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Doesn't have to be particularly neat. Yeah, just like that. Okay, so this is ready for me to put my zipper in. Well, my zipper's not ready to be put in yet, but this is ready. So I'm going to set that aside now as well. The pieces that we're going to be using now are going to be our M1 and our M2 pieces. So these are our exterior zip pockets, not to be confused with our L's. So we also have L1 and L2, but these are for our interior. Okay. So I'm going to start with my larger piece. So that's going to be M1 is the one that I'm going to be working with first of all. I'm using zipper tape, so I'm just going to put my slider on my zipper tape. So this is number 5. Got that uneven, so I'll just do it again. There we go. So all I need, I can just use this as measure because I've just got my big piece. It doesn't really matter. This is 9 inches wide, so I can just cut my zipper off or cut a chunk of zipper that's 9 inches wide as well. That part of it is not crucial. So I want to make sure, now this is where I want to make sure that my zippers are going to open the correct way. So I want, now you'll notice I have both sides are closed. I like to work that way if I can. So I'm going to move this a little bit. So my zipper is facing this way. So when I undo it, I'm going to be going from left to right. So as I undo it, it's going to open because I'm going toward the right. So I'm going to just zip that back up. So lining face up, zipper face up, opening from left to right. Now I can, because I'm using fabric here, I can use pins again if I want. I'm not going to. This is pretty easy to do. One of the things, a real great trick if you haven't learned it already, is when you start sewing down here and you get toward the head of, or your zipper slider, just move your zipper slider out of the way and then continue on. Makes it easier so you don't have that little hump. It doesn't even need to be an issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this on at a 2.5, and I'm going to stay fairly close to the edge. So I don't want even to be in 1/4 inch. Can I say a generous 1/8 of an inch? Just so that we've got a good grasp on here. So that's what I'm gonna sew this on at. So I've got my zipper sewn on, and I've pressed away from the zipper toward the lining. So if you can see that. So so that this lays nice and flat. I know this is probably going to seem all backwards and weird, but just trust the process and it will work out just perfectly. So, so this is essentially, this is the top of the lining, or the back of the lining. So now we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to take our shorter piece. So this is M2, face up. Once again, the zipper is going to be face up. This time the zipper obviously is going the other way, but that's fine. And again, clip that together, do the same thing, generous 1/8 inch seam allowance, and press it as well. All right, so this looks all backwards. I've got my good side here and no zipper showing. And I've got my other side here, my wrong side, and I've got my zipper pull showing, and it's to the left. Well, that's exactly what we want. So the next thing that we're going to do is put on some double-sided tape on each side. Where we're going with this is going to get centered in here, positioned and centered in here. We're going to then top stitch all the way around, and that will finish. That's as much as there is to putting in that zipper. So first of all, let's get some double-sided tape. Now when we place our double-sided tape, I'm going to bring you in a bit. I want to make sure that I stay out of my stitching line. It's not important that you get close to your zipper. It is important that you stay away from your stitching. Some people have a lot of problems with their needle gumming up if they hit double-sided tape. Now the double-sided tape that I'm using, this is called Peel and Stick. I carry it here in my store, and this is quite permanent. It is not like the, I'm not even sure what the name of it is. It's very light, and it sticks fabric together really well, but it doesn't work very well for leather and vinyl and that kind of stuff. This works for everything as long as you don't sew through it. So I'm going to stay back. I'm going to kind of use, I mean, although you probably can't see it, my stitching line here, I'm going to use that kind of as a guide. Even if I'm on my fabric, that doesn't matter. All we're trying to do is make sure that everything doesn't slip around. Okay, now we're only going to do one of these at one side at a time here. So I'm going to take off this top one. Sometimes this can be a little ornery. There we go. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and kind of, let's go out here a little bit. There we go. I'm going to try and eyeball it so that I'm kind of centered in here as well. I can kind of tell by the tops up here. There we go. Now I want to make sure that my zipper is nice and straight. So I'm going to move my zipper pull to the far left. That's where it's going to be sitting anyway. And this tape is sticky, which once you get it positioned is a very good thing. Okay. So I'm happy with how that's worked out. Move that over, flip this up. Sometimes it depends on what I'm working with. I don't always use both sides of the tape, or put tape on both sides. And until you really stick it down, until you really push on this, you can kind of move things around a little bit. There. Okay. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did on the outside, but I'm going to do it on the inside all the way around. So if I flip this over, this is laying flat. And I'm just going to finish that off. Okay, so that's it. I did the same thing, only I didn't have corners to go around. Well, I didn't have rounded corners anyway. I just went out to the corners and all the way around. Now, I have to find where I did it, but where I stitched over my stitching. On the outside, because it's going to be inside the bag, like in the lining and that kind of stuff. Now, where am I? Back here. So I have my tails here. I can leave those. I don't need to trim them away because they're going to be hidden. Now inside here, there we go. This is where I've got my tails here for the lining. I'm sorry, for the interior of the zipper. It will be seen from the lining. That didn't make, well, it made sense to me, but let's see if it did to you guys. I'm going to pull these. I want to trim those short because in theory, someone opens a zipper and they would see threads there. So I'm going to use a little bit of fray check. It's really hard for me to see even because of the black on black. But I'm going to use a little fray check there. I'm also on the top here going to use a little bit of fray check. And I can use a cloth or my fingers or whatever. And I'm kind of wiping it off, but I'm also kind of wiping it into hold those stitches. And I very recently on Amazon got this little cool little tool. And it works really quite well. Especially I'm using bonded nylon thread. There we go, get up here. So I'm going to hold my thread, and when I press the button, it's just battery powered, but when I press the button, the very tip of it heats up. So it burns my threads, melts the thread, and cuts it off at the same time. This is a little easier to do with some tweezers. There we go. So they're gone. I could just as easily trim them off with some scissors or just kind of use a little lighter to melt them as well. But hey, when you have a gadget, why not use it? So that's that. Now this is going to come over. The double-sided tape is just kind of sticking it, and that's fine. We don't even need to do anything with the double-sided tape. Pan out here. So I'm just pulling that top piece down. So this is what's going to happen now when we open up this pocket. Then we're going to see our lining in here, and it looks really nice and clean. There are no edges, there's no raw edges showing anywhere. So that's the great part about this pocket. And no facings to flip through and turn around. So from this other side, now all we have to do, this pattern is a drop-in lining, so we will not have any open pockets to berth the bag through. So all I'm going to do now is, I've got double-sided tape that's just kind of holding me back here. From this side, I'm going to fold this back, and 3/8 inch allowance, whatever you can grab there, is fine, and just go all the way around and close up this pocket. Now you'll see, I mean, I can shift this over slightly, but however it lays is fine. If it's flat, even if even if the sides don't match up. This one is shifted a little bit. It's just fine. It's honestly not going to make any difference at all. So all I want to do now is get that pocket closed up. I'm going to fold this back. This is what works best for me, is laying this flat on my machine, going all the way around and coming up on this side. So I'm just gonna, I got a little carried away with the double-sided tape. I didn't need to go all the way out to the edges there. So I'll just kind of get that off of there as well so that I can finish that up. So here it is, my pocket's closed. Now when I open this, look inside, it's closed up. Easy peasy. You know, since I started doing these overlays, that is absolutely my preferred method of putting pockets in. We're going to do the same thing for the interior pocket. It's going to be all of the exact same method, only instead of this piece, it's going to be a piece of lining. Really, really super straightforward. Now, if you can believe it, we're actually going to be kind of finishing the assembly of the exterior. I mean, this is just humming right along. It's so quick and easy, and it's going to be just beautiful. So the next pieces that we're going to be using are we're going to use our side pieces. Now, I've got fusible fleece on both of these because I'm using fabric. Again, if I was using vinyl, cork, or leather, I wouldn't be using fusible fleece, sorry. And depending on what I was using, whether the vinyl stretched or not, or whether the leather was thin, would depend on whether I'd be using the interfacing or not as well. So this is where we're going to be doing the assembling of the sides. That is also integral to the base. So in making putting on the base really easy, this is where we need to pay some attention here. So I'm going to take the bottom pieces of my sides here, and I'm going to mark. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch up, and I'm going to put a mark there. I'm going to do that on both of them. I mark both of them, and you'll see later on, because depending on what side I'm sewing depends on whether this needs to be marked or my other pattern piece needs to be marked. So I just mark everything, and then I don't have to worry about it later on. So those are marked 1/2 inch from the bottom. Again, now this is my bottom, and I'm going to do the same thing on it. This won't be seen, so you can mark with whatever you want to mark with. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom part of this one as well. So now that I have all of the bottom parts here marked, I'm actually going to mark the tops as well. This is going to be a drop-in lining, and it's going to be actually, it's even easiest if before we start this assembly, if we do a little bit of pressing. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to, my end game is that I'm going to end up folding this down 1/2 inch. So I'm going to mark this at 1 inch. So I'm going to line up my line here all the way along. And again, it doesn't matter, whatever, I don't know if my pencil will work very well on this fusible fleece or not. Yeah, it works well enough anyway. So I've got a line here. I'm going to take my other piece, make sure I get the top. And we're marking this for a different reason than what we marked the bottom for. And these little guys, again, same thing. We're going to mark an inch. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to press all of these. Now I don't need to press the heck out of them because I just basically need a good crimp. I need to give myself a good base, because when all of this gets put together, when all of this is sewn together and I have my exterior done, all of this needs to be folded over, and it's just going to be sitting there like that. So when we're finished with it, everything needs to be folded over 1/2 inch. Again, because this is a drop-in lining, if this was leather, I would actually have double-sided tape on here ready to go, so that when I fold it over and stick it down, that there's less mussing and fussing trying to get all the way around a bag and that kind of thing. You'll see that will make sense very, very shortly. So I'm going to give a press. I'm going to bring that top down to my 1 inch mark, and that's going to give me a 1/2 inch fold. This as well. Bring this all the way down. Again, my corners, I don't need to necessarily just, you know, press them really super, super crisp or anything like that, because I'm going to be sewing a seam on there anyway. So I went over to my ironing board and I got one part done, and then I went to do this one. Now I can see already that when I fold this over, that I can feel that there's going to be fusible fleece. I'm going to end up with a crimp here, and I don't want that. I want everything to be nice and flat and smooth as possible. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of pick this back. It's hard because it really is stuck on there well. But I'm able to get it back a little bit, and I'm just going to trim a little bit off. Oh, sorry about that. There. Again, it does not need to be perfect. I just really want it out of that seam allowance so that when I fold this over now, then it's nice and smooth in there. Okay, so this is what I end up with. Again, I'm not super concerned with it being totally flat and perfect, but I've got a really good crimp there. Biggest thing is it's nice and straight. So I've got it pressed. There we go. I've got it pressed, and it's nice and straight across here. This one, same thing, just fold it over. Same with my little guys here. Now I can continue on with the assembly part. So I'm going to line up the bottom. And I have just learned this works well. In this case, instead of trying to get my clip over here to line things up, it tends to shift because of the curve. So if I put a clip here, that helps as well. Line it up at the top. Now, I have a little extra in here. That's not a problem. I'm just going to do my best to ease that in. Now, if you have stuff that you need to ease in, a little trick is to, if you have the part that you need to ease, where the extra is, if you have that against your feed dogs will kind of a lot of times anyway, they will kind of ease that in very, very gently. Sometimes you just need to give it a little bit of a pull. We don't want to, every time now when I say yarding, that is a Canadian term apparently, but I am Canadian, so I guess I can use it. But if I pull this taut, then it will take that out as well. So sometimes when I'm sewing, if I know that I've got a little bit of extra there, I just have to give it a little bit of a pull there. So I'm going to do my best just to kind of ease this in and make it nice and even. That's one side. Now I'm going to do the same side on the other side. I'm going to come down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to come all the way down, and I have to stop and back stitch at my 1/2 inch mark. That's why I made this mark. Now on this one, I've got that easing. The reason why I did all of my marks all over the place, or on all the bottoms, is so that it wouldn't matter which way I'm doing. So if I marked on this side, but I'm not going to be sewing on this side, I can't see it. So if I use this side, then I've got my mark up here. So when I start, I just go back and then all the way forward to the end here. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch on both of these ones. I'm going to, with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so both sides are done, and I've come down only to here. If you go over a stitch or two, especially two, you're going to have to undo it. And if all is not lost, but you'll have to unpick back to there, start here, and then just do a back stitch. So that you come down and then go back, so that when, if there's tension put on this, that it doesn't pull your stitching out. Very important for a successful bottom. All right, so now this can be, before we even go any further, we can just fold this over. We want to get that little curve in there and stuff. And I'm going to give this a bit of a press. That will give me a nice corner. So you can see just by giving it a little bit of a press, I wasn't pressing the crap out of it and stuff, but it gives a nice corner to that. At this point, if I'm working with leather, then I use my press plates with the riser cap and just give it a crimp all the way across. Or even some vinyl, same thing, you can't press vinyl, so I have to use something, and that's what works well for this. So same with the other side, just going to give this a little bit of a press. So now to explain again, see how this is bulging on this side. I don't have anything sewn to it yet, but on this other side, now that I have the seam there and have a corner made now, and it was just as bulging as this one, now it lays flat, because this has to kind of go around that corner just a tiny bit. So that's what gives us that nice finish. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to do basically the same thing, only I'm going to have to do one side, fit this side, get that sewn in, and then I'm going to have to pull it and just kind of adjust it and stuff, and get the other side done as well. Exact same thing, only go down to this 1/2 inch mark and no further. All the way up to the top here, but that 1/2 inch is just so important. So I've got all of my sides sewn together. Everything is pressed, and it kind of stands up already on its own. Now I'm not going to be too worried right away about getting these folded over and pressed again. because we will be clipping the seam allowances, but just not quite yet. So I'm going to turn this back again. There we go. And this is the bottom. Now, in this case, now we need our base B. So that's the exterior base. Now, if you are using fabric, which I don't know, this is my opinion, for the bottom of a handbag, it's such a small piece of vinyl or some cork or something like that. It just for wear and for just being able to wash it, and you never know. You set your purse down somewhere and it might be a little bit iffy as to whether you should have or not. At least this way, then you can wipe it off or disinfect it or whatever. So anyway, and I like the stability as well of using something that has a little bit more form to it. So, all right, this is the easiest way that I have found, and I've had very, very good luck with it. So what I'm doing here is when I pull these seams out, they are the same size as the width of my base. So I'm just lining up the exterior parts here. It's actually, I guess I'm the side with the base. But I'm matching my corners. And I'm starting at the short ends, and believe me, this is what for me makes all the difference. So I've got one side clipped together. I'm going to go to the other side, and I'm going to center it and line it up with my corners. All right, so now when I flip this over, I've come down here to this corner, and this is 1/2 inch. I'm going to again do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but now I'm going to start back here. This is my preference of how I do it. I start back here, back stitch. I'm going to go just to that corner, and ideally if I can meet that stitching right at that corner, not one stitch past it, but if I can meet up with that, then go forward, again stopping at my stitching here, hopefully matching right up with it, and then back stitch, and then I'm done. Do that on both sides. Now to show you, on this side I was bang on. My stitching meets perfectly. That's about as good as it gets. Now this side, I'm just a tiny little bit off. That I can live with. Anything more than that, I would have tried to correct just to make sure that I close that hole. That's very, very small margin of error there. So that's not a big deal. Now I'm going to do the long parts. So I've got my sides done, or yeah, the ends, sides, whichever. Now all I have to do is pull this tight, and it doesn't matter which way you work from, depends on, I guess, what works better for you. Now I'm going to just line up my edges and clip. When I go to sew, I'm going to pull this corner out. I'm going to kind of fold this out of the way so that I can fold this as flat as I can, so that when I put it into my sewing machine, that I can start back here, go, and then come forward without a whole bunch of bulk and weird angles and stuff like that. So there is my base sewn on. Went together really nice, and it's all because, see, all of these are still open. because there's nothing sewn into corners and stuff. So as long as, yeah, again, it's hard to see because I'm black on black here, but all of my corners meet. And if they didn't, if I felt that there was too much of a gap somewhere, this one isn't quite perfect, but I'm like one stitch away. So by the time I turn it, I'm still gonna be okay. We won't be able to see that. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go around and I'm going to trim my seam allowances. So it doesn't really matter where you start or how you do it, whatever makes you comfortable. I'm not gonna clip my corner here really super close. I'm going to get some of the bulk out of there certainly, but I'm still going to leave at least 1/8 of an inch there. Then when I go, I'm going to do each seam individually, and I'm going to take about half of it off. So I'm going to cut off about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to do that on the base as well. So everything is going to get trimmed about half of it off. So there, I have everything trimmed. Now I can go and I can just press the tops of these open and then fold it and then just give it another press. So all of this is sewn together. It's all clipped, it's trimmed, the top is pressed, it's all ready to go. So I'm ready to put in my heavy interfacing into the bottom. Now, depending on what you like to use, I've started using a lot. Well, I've been working with leather for quite a bit. I also use, in working with leather, I've learned to use Bontex, or I've found this product, and it works really well. It's like cardboard. You cannot birth this, because if it gets bent, that's it. It's going to lose its stiffness or its effectiveness. So I'm going to turn my bag. You can use Peltex, whatever it is that you want to use at this point. Because again, this is a drop-in lining, we don't have any problem using something like this. If you don't have it, you can use just about anything in there actually. You probably even use cardboard. So I'm just going to gently work out my corners. My handy point turner when I need that. I prefer just to be able to use my finger if I can. I've got that in there, but if I need to poke it out just a little bit more, I can. But fingers have been working pretty good as well. Here we are. Now I'm going to put this in. I'm just going to make sure that it fits, which it does. Of course it does. So that's going to give that a nice solid bottom to it. And I'm going to, again, for myself, I'm going to use my 303. I've been, especially for things like this, I've been really liking using a spray adhesive. I've seen where people have used glue and they've kind of given it a swirl, stuck it in the bottom of the bag, and they've turned it over and you can see exactly where the glue swirl was. So if I can get a layer on here instead of, especially if something like the glue or the spray adhesive, then I can lay it in there and then nothing can be seen from the other side. Now there's probably a serious amount of overkill on the amount of glue that I used in here, but here I definitely want a permanent bond. So I'm going to be careful before I get it pushed down, that I have it positioned where I need it. Get things like seam allowances and that kind of thing out of the way so that it's sitting right on the very bottom. There we go. So that feels really good and secure in the bottom there. Nice flat, looks really good, very professional. Well, I like that. And that's it. So that is our exterior. At this point, it's done. Ready to do the interior.